Okay. Before we get into that actual question, let's just talk about AP in general for just a little bit, okay? Come May, you're going to take an AP test in this class, right? You're going to have 40 multiple choice questions at 90 minutes. I've never had a student say that that was an issue. Never had a student say that that was too much time or not enough time. It's always been a little bit more than plenty of time, okay, with that part of it. You're going to have about a 10-minute break or whatever else, and then you're going to do the free response. There are 6 free response questions for an equal of 90 minutes. I put you about 15 minutes per question out of those 6, except number 6 will always take you longer. I will not give you a number 6 until towards the end of the year. So every free response question you get will be something like a 1 through 5. And that's why I say you need about 13 minutes max to do one of those if you're timing it correctly. I do have students say that timing is an issue on the free response. I do have students say that I did not have enough time to finish the free response. Just kind of keep all that aware, and that's kind of why I'll try to lock this down to 13 minutes or so, just to get you somewhat accustomed to the timing, okay? One of the things I want you to be aware of also is the space provided is not an indication of how much work you need to show or how much writing you need to have, okay? A lot of times they will give you, well, they will always give you more space than you need. I don't. I try to save paper. So sometimes you may not have enough to answer what you want to. There should be, but just kind of understand that type of information. The space provided does not indicate how much writing you need to have. Okay? So that's why I timed that for 13 minutes. Kind of wrap your head around all that stuff. Your test on Tuesday is going to have 20 multiple choice, so I cut that in half. However, this is like the entire year. You know where this is coming from. It's coming from that one chapter, right? And then I typically give you 2 free responses. Free responses don't always just have one question. They typically have an A part, a B part, or a C part, D part. This one had an A, B, C, and D, okay? Sometimes some parts of it are easier or harder than others. Your job is to always just do the best you can do, right? Try to get as many points as you can. That's the bottom line, right? Try to get as many points as you can. I say there's 2 free responses, and then there's some fill in the blanks, or there's some. I think I give you a quick little scenario, and you tell me what kind of sampling it was. Okay, whether it was simple random sample, whether it was stratified, whether it was cluster, whether it was voluntary, whatever it might be. Okay, so typically enough time, but again, just kind of keep timing in mind as you're taking a test. I give you the entire test. So you can do the multiple choice, or you can do the free response first, or you can do 1 or 2, or go back and forth and all that. Okay. On AP, you get the multiple choice, and then you get the free response. Everybody okay with all that situation, Joe? Okay. So now you kind of, I am going to do this first one on paper. I'm not comfortable yet making it on a computer. I mean, I want you guys to be comfortable taking a test, and I'm not sure a computer does that, although your AP test is on a computer. So we'll practice. It worked out well last year, so we're good. Okay, here's what I want to do for that particular question that you just got for the Frappy, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of give you the perfect answer. Nobody writes the perfect answer. Nobody writes the perfect answer. And then I'm going to kind of go over the rubric, okay? The best that I can, and you're going to try to grade it the best that you can. It's not easy. I know it's not, and you're not that accustomed to grading towards the rubric, but just kind of look at it and see if you kind of hit it or if you didn't hit it. Just understand that there's 19 of you cats in here, and there's all 19 different answers for that one. All right, well, I did this. Well, I did this. Well, I did this. Well, I did this. If you hit the rubric, you're good. If you didn't, then you're not. Okay? I thought the first question was pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It got a little bit harder as we got to B and C, and then I think D went back to something fairly easy. That, I just want you to be aware of that. Just because you think it's D doesn't always mean it's the hardest. Okay, it does not go in any sequential order or anything. Number 5 might be easier than number 1. Okay, so here's how this one graded. Model solution, letter A. Label 83 note cards with A, 83 note cards with B. Shuffle the cards well. Hand one card out to each subject at random. Subjects with A cards will receive the antibiotic, and subject with B cards receive the placebo. That was a model solution, perfect, okay? Here's what the rubric says. Here's what the rubric says. A, so you got it essentially correct, partially correct, or incorrect. Essentially correct. The response describes some method of random assignment that's described in sufficient detail and results in a completely randomized design. They don't care how you do it. They don't say how, what, whatever. As long as it's random assignment, sufficient detail, and randomized design. Partially correct if you did a method of random assignment that results in a completely randomized design, you just weren't specific enough. It wasn't quite clear. And if it's not an E and it's not a P, then it's an I. They did throw some notes up there, okay? In these notes, there are 5. A response that says use a random number generator or uses a random digit table is not sufficiently detailed, right? Hat method, that's not going to get you. Used a calculator, no, that's not going to get you, right? It's got to be sufficiently detailed. How did you use the calculator? And when you got those numbers, how did those numbers associate to people? And then what did the people get? If a response uses a random digit, you have to explain what you would do with repeated numbers. If a response uses a random digit table, you must start with 0, 0, 1, not 1. That's why I push the non-random digit table because of that. A response that incorporates blocking, it's an I. If you got any kind of blocking whatsoever, it's an I because that's not an SRS. A response that uses coin flipping or equivalent and stops assigning subjects to a treatment when the number of subjects reaches 83 must put the subjects in random order first to have a completely randomized design. Because once you stop at 83, it's no longer randomly generated because not everybody else has an equal chance of being selected anymore. They're done. Kind of okay with that? Here is one student's answer, just to kind of look at this. To assign treatments randomly, you could write A and B on 166 note cards, 83 with A and 83 with B. I'm glad that they said 83 with A and 83 with B, because if they just said A and B on 166, I don't think that's sufficient enough. Put the cards in a hat. Draw at random. Give one card to each adult recruited. Kind of see what they did? Hit me.
Would you need to say he has to mix the cards in the hat? No?
You're okay. The random covered that part. But we are missing something. Hit me.
You have to say which one you assigned to.
Yeah, they didn't give him an assignment. They didn't give him a group. They didn't give him a group. So, in part A, the response describes a completely randomized design. Does not include sufficient detail about random assignment process. The response doesn't indicate on the note cards need to be shuffled, and doesn't identify which treatment, the A and B. It just lacked just a little bit, kind of what Constantine was saying right there. They weren't shuffled. I think we're still okay on that part of it, but it's the assignment part. It's enough to get a P, it's not enough to get an E. Okay with that? Here's student section 2. Can I get off this somehow? There we go. There's C and D. Now here's, give each person a number from 1 to 166. Then use a random number generator to divide the subject into 2 groups of 83. Flip a coin. If it lands on heads, the first group gets the antibiotic. If it lands on tails, the second group gets the antibiotic. The response describes a completely randomized design, doesn't include sufficient detail about random assignment process. Again, same type issue they're missing out on. It doesn't describe how to use the random number generator. Also, flipping a coin to determine which group receives what is really unnecessary, as the groups were formed at random. There's really no need to flip a coin to see which one gets which. You give one group one and one group the other. It doesn't matter. You don't have to random that part of it. So both of those got a P. Both of those got a P. Everybody okay? Now, here is part B. Benefit. We can make inferences about the subjects with moderate, severe, very severe symptoms, and not just those with very severe. That was what is that what they could they blocked by something, or is that what they did? What did they do for that? I forgot what the part was.
They said, what was the
Advantage.
all had moderate, severe.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What the
Okay. And then the drawback, because the subjects with very severe symptoms will likely have different test scores than those with moderate symptoms, there's going to be more variability in the test scores because the range of the symptoms are included. This will make it more difficult to find convincing evidence that the antibiotic is more effective than a placebo. Hard to get, I mean, nobody wrote that, right? So let's kind of see what the rubric says. Okay, here's B part. E, the response identifies a benefit of larger scope of inference, basically some type of larger drawing to the population, some type of larger scope of benefit, and a drawback of increased variability in the test scores. Too much range, too much to tell the difference, something to that effect. A P, if you only identified one of the two, and then I otherwise. Okay? Note, saying only there will be more variability without specifying that there will be more variability in the response is not sufficient enough. You can't just say there's more variability. More variability in the response. Okay? Again, look at these students. Is that number 2? I should probably do it first. I can't get off the blue now. That be? Yep. Benefit. Since the subjects had all kinds of levels of sinus infections, the result and conclusions drawn will be applied generally to all people with sinus infections. Therefore, conclusions can be drawn about the antibiotic's overall effectiveness. I think that's good for the benefit part. Drawback, because the levels of the sinus infections that the subjects had varies, results are going to have more variability, thus precise conclusions cannot be drawn about the level of the effectiveness of the antibiotic. Part B. The response identifies a larger scope of inference as a benefit. However, response states that the results can be applied to all people. If we read that really quickly like I did, instead of just people with moderate, severe, and very severe symptoms, because you can't say all people, because all people implies all people. This was judged as a minor error with no loss of credit. Therefore, provides correct drawback stating there would be that. It actually was scored a E. Even though it said that's not enough to really say they know a benefit and they know a drawback. Okay? Here's part 2, or person 2. Person 2. One benefit of using people with moderate, severe, or very severe symptoms is that we have a much larger population than if we only use people with very severe symptoms. However, a drawback is that we won't be able to tell if the results were due to the antibiotic or to the symptoms. Part B. In Part B, the response identifies a larger population as a benefit. However, because its response doesn't address the ability to make inferences about the larger proportion, no credit is earned for the benefit. The response identifies a confounding between symptoms and treatments as the drawback, but these variables will not be confounded in a completely randomized design because neither benefit nor a drawback was hit. They scored an I. Kind of hurts. They look like they know a little bit about what's going on, but they didn't hit anything on the rubric. Question C. This one was tough, I would think, mostly because I did not do a great job of explaining this part of it. The difference is not statistically significant. The difference was not large enough to rule out random chance as a plausible explanation. That is, the observed difference could be due to the random assignment and not necessarily to the effects. It wasn't a surprise that the result that they got. It was something that was expected to get. Okay? It was not statistically significant. Here's how the rubric showed on C part. Essentially correct. Indicates the difference could be due to chance and explains that the chance is due to the random assignment of the treatments. I think explaining it, the chance being the random assignment, is going to be difficult to get. Partially correct if it only states that the difference could be due to chance. Again, this is mostly on a me issue, not a you issue. This is more future question, truthfully. All right. Oh, you don't want that. I need this. Oops. Let's go ahead and answer this one. This is person 2. Person 2. The average test scores for the antibiotic and placebo groups weren't very different. That was person 2 in C. In part C, the response does not address the need to consider the role of chance when determining statistical significance. Part C was scored an I. That wasn't enough. Let's go to person 1, see what they said. Sorry, here we go. The results could be due to random chance. Bless. So that's what they said. In part C, the response correctly states that the results could be due to random chance, does not address the random assignment to treatments or answer in context. Therefore, C was scored a P. Okay? One more. Part D. Part D. Come on. To incorporate blocking, form blocks based on the initial conditions of patients. I'm not too sure what else you would form a block in. However, they accepted other things you'll see on the rubric. That is, put all the patients with various symptoms into one block and so on. Then within each block, randomly assign the subjects to treatments as in part A. Blocking by initial severity will help us account for the additional variability in the test scores caused by the differences in the severity. Oh, rubric. C, D. Essentially correct. The response describes forming blocks by groups of subjects with similar characteristics and indicates that the subjects will be randomly assigned to treatments within the block. Partially correct. The response describes forming blocks by groups of subjects with similar characteristics, does not indicate we're going to be randomly assigned within the block. Notes. They threw some notes up here for you guys. A response that uses a variable other than the severity of symptoms must include a justification for that reason, right? Somehow or another, that addresses the variability in the test scores. The justification is not included, but the response otherwise is correct. We can score it a P. In part D, the random assignment within blocks needs to be mentioned but not described. You don't have to describe how you're going to randomly do it because you already explained how to randomly do it in A. As a response of pairs, so you could pair this also. Pairing is a special kind of block, but you could pair them, and you can score that at E. In this context, a response that assigns both treatments to each is scored a P. You can't assign both to each treatment. D. The researchers could have grouped the subjects according to the severity of their sinus infections, moderate, severe, very severe. They could then randomly assign half the people in each group to the antibiotic treatment and the other halves to the placebo. Part D, the response correctly forms blocks based on the severity of problems. Part D was scored an E. Even though they didn't say compare or anything else, they did it by group, and then they randomly assigned within the group, and that's really all you needed. Okay? Person 2 on theirs. You guys are doing good. The researchers could have blocked their design by separating the subjects with the moderate, severe, very severe. Good. And given half of the block the placebo and the other half the antibiotic. They missed the second part, right? They didn't randomly assign. They just said half. Half get, half get. You got to randomly do it. Part D, in Part D, the response correctly describes forming blocks. However, it does not indicate the treatment should be randomly assigned. Part D was scored a partially correct. Okay? Now, Let's talk about how AP would give you a point for this, and then I'll tell you my difference. Each E is counted as a point. Each E counts as 1 point. Each P counts as a half a point. So a max of 4 points. Each E counts as 1 point. Each P counts as a half a point. If a response is between two scores, 2.5, then they're going to use a holistic approach to decide if I'm going to make a 2.5 a 3 or if the 2.5 stays a 2. They're not going to give you 2.5. They're going to round it to a 3 or to a 2. So they're going to look at the entire grade. Basically, you got 4 points. So it's 100%, 75%, 50%, or 20%, or 25%, right? So they're going to look at it holistically. Does this cat understand 75% of statistics or of this topic, or do they only understand 50% of it? Was it a small error, or a couple of small errors, or was it a pretty good size error? And then they also say, depending on the overall strength of the response, particularly in parts A and D. So A and D, they're really focusing on. If you get A and D solid, then they're probably going to bump you up because they're not as worried about B and C, because really that's not part of the sampling. Kind of okay? I will grade this I will grade it differently. I basically grade each question as 4 points. So A part's 4 points, B part's 4 points, C part's 4 points, and D is 4 points. Unless if it's so obvious that I'm probably just going to give you 2 points. 4 points. 1 point if you can put down anything that looks like it's statistics. I'm going to give you 1 point. And then 2 points pretty much for getting close to the P. Depending on how strong your P is, you can get 3 points. And then 4 if you hit the rubric. Okay with that? There's very few 2s, truthfully. I mean, it's either a 1 or 3 or 4. There's very few 2s. If it's so weak, but it can't get the P, but it's better than a 1, and that's how the 2s end up. So that's kind of how I grade it. Do you know 100% of that question, 75%, 50%, or 25%? Or if you leave it blank, then 0%, right? Can't grade blanks. Y'all okay with that? Makes sense? Beautiful. All right, rest of the class period is yours. All right, this is what I have for you guys. I went back because I had some students that were confused about the 4.17 Ls, right? The L's you don't have to do if you did the 4.1s. But if you can't remember, then I put the 4 point, I hit them at first, but I put them back to where you can see them. So if you look at week 2, you can see if you did 4.1 or 4.2. And if they're both complete, then you don't need to do 4.1 late or 4.2 late. Okay? 4.3 doesn't have a late. I just moved its due date till Tuesday. And then there is a 4 review out of Achieve. Those 4 are 4 grade that's going in the grade book. Okay? Now, the review, I did it different. You don't know if you got them right or wrong until you hit submit. Okay? If you get 8, there's 10 questions, I think. If you get 8 or above, you'll get 5. If you don't get 8 or above, when you submit, you can go back and do it again. You should be able to. I fixed it. It wasn't that way at first. Okay? And they're the same questions. You just have to answer them correctly. Okay? Also, on Google Classroom, guys, I gave you more than you would ever want to know. Okay? On Google Classroom in classwork, review for the exam. Practice 1 through 10, practice 11 through 20, 21 through 30, 31 through 40, 41 through 50. Those are 50 multiple choice practice questions. I don't care if you do a single one of them or none of them. Okay? It's on a Google form. I won't know if you answered it or not. You get the question. When you hit next, it gives you the answer and explains it. Okay? Good practice. There's 50 of them. That's way more than you probably ever want. Okay? So there's 50 of those. Here's the review worksheet that I gave you, blank. Here's the review open response that I gave you, blank. Here is, oh, I meant to rename that. This is the answers to the review. I need to rename that. Answers to the review. These are the solutions to the free response, the rubrics. Okay? There's the 1997 solution. There's a 1999 solution. There's a 2000 solution. I should have just all put them as one paper. And then the last thing I'm going to open up are the, what are those things called on AP Classroom? Concept checks. I'm going to open up the concept checks on AP Classroom. You don't have to do any of them. You can do them all. I'm not smart enough to come up with my own multiple choice questions, so if you did them all, you're probably going to see some of them that are going to be on the test. Good enough with all that stuff? Anything you're confused about? Y'all okay? Okay. Again, spend the rest of your class period hopefully reviewing for that test that you guys are going to